Hello and welcome to Empire Watch Weekly Live. Sarah just wanted to do a dramatic entrance. I'm Ileana Chan, and here's my co-host, Sara Vivacqua. You're back in Brazil.
I'm back in Brazil, back in the New Year's. Very happy to be here with you again, Ileana. We had a great time in London. I can't thank you enough for all you've organized back in London. We met a lot of interesting people doing changes, and it was really great to be with you there and to have such a fun time.
It was so lovely. We got to meet some of our featured guests on this show in person. That's always so exciting. It's so nice to have a meal with them. So that was a lovely experience. But for those of you that are new to Empire Watch Weekly Live, every week we break down the weekly news from around the world through an anti-imperialist lens. Every week on Friday, 12 p.m. UTC, that is 9 a.m. Brasilia time, and 8 p.m. Beijing time. We will be challenging the mainstream media narratives and examine what's really going on behind the headlines and propaganda. I mean, this week we have a lot of propaganda to get through because it is Davos. Davos is kind of like an amazing thing, but let's look at what we are doing this week with my handy little graphic. So here we go. We got everyone is talking about the Davos Circus. It is still ongoing. Today's the last day of that. And then everyone should be talking about China and Canada reset. That's a significant thing. It actually broke last week on our live. So we didn't have a chance to genuinely cover it, but we're going to do a little bit of a slightly deeper dive into that. And then we have our special guest, João Amorim. I'm terrible at names. We all know this. But he will be joining us to talk about how the Global South is rallying around Venezuela and Cuba. So it's going to be really interesting talk.
Yeah. João is someone who was born into diplomacy. His father is the advisor to Lula, President Lula in Brazil for all along, and other presidents. He's one of the biggest diplomats in the world. So João was born in this context, and he has made his own path as well. I think he's he is a name in his own right. He's a filmmaker, a very interesting filmmaker, and someone who's very into politics. I mean, I don't think he had a choice, did he? Yeah, I don't think he had a choice.
Well, I mean, he could have chosen to be incredibly stubborn, but no, he instead chose to look at the world, explore the world, learn about the world. And he is a filmmaker, producer, and an animator, which is really interesting, focused on social and environmental storytellings from the perspective of the Global South. He directed Utopia Tropical, featuring Noam Chomsky and Celso Amorim, I suppose his father,
yeah.
Minister, and the 2012 Time for Change, a documentary on sustainability and transformation featuring David Lynch, Sting, Elliot Page, and Gilberto Gil, or Gilberto
Gil, one of the most famous musicians, yeah.
And his recent work includes Pesticides Without Borders. I'm not even going to try to say the Portuguese name, and with researcher Larissa Bombardi, which premiered at 30 and engages directly with grassroots movements. The rest of his bio is down below in the description. You can also look at his production company's website, because they do really interesting work. And also I should add in his IMDb page, because he's done some really interesting work. He's also done the Brazilian version of Sesame Street, which I think is really cool for those of us that actually grew up with Sesame Street. So please check out his work. But he will be joining us a little bit later today. And also, Sarah, I want to say hello to some of our returning guests. I mean, we have Rafael Diaz here. I feel like Diaz. I feel like he is maybe a possible fan of yours. I'm not just even. He's back again. He's saying hello, and he's from Brazil. So welcome.
Great to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. For those of you, I'm going to do a little plugging for our Patreon, because So embarrassingly enough, we have below 200 followers on Patreon. Can we get to at least above 200? Is it possible? Please join our Patreon down below. And if you can make a donation, like even a little bit, a few bucks a month, it does help. It just helps us cover some costs, which we are trying to do right now. So please do that.
We have a small team of very competent people. We have Martha doing these amazing graphs. I have to thank Martha. It's just beautiful the way she deals with color, imagery. It just elevates. And you're working super hard. I couldn't say the same about me at the moment. But this is a channel made with a lot of passion, with a true
and we also have an editor
informing people. We are not here for money, but we do need some money to, unfortunately, to make the things going.
Yeah,
and money is a demon we all need to face at some point.
We need to pay people that. Yeah, we do need to pay people that put in the work. Like our editor, for example, who is also, she's a Korean woman. So we're like, from all over the world. We're all women. Not that was the requirement for joining Empire Watch, but it happened.
The qualification, only women can meet them.
Okay, just a joke.
Strangely, we only had male guests except for Lotte. So I mean, there is an imbalance here. We're gonna take care of that later.
We have to address that imbalance. We have to actually invite more female guests. So if you have any suggestions for guests that you would like to see on the show, please drop them in the chat. Tell us, we can try to track these people down and try to get them on.
Don't ask for the Kardashians. Don't ask for this type of folks.
Yeah, no one that's like just impossible. But don't ask for Hillary Clinton, for example. Don't ask for outright imperialists.
I love to have her here, though. I'd love to have her. I mean,
oh God,
there's a lot to discuss.
She would definitely not come on our show.
Of course.
Sorry to break your dreams. Okay, cool. So let's talking about billionaires and the elite. What a good segue to the Davos circus. So for those of you who don't know, excuse me, Davos 2026 refers to the World Economic Forum annual meeting held in Davos clusters, Switzerland, and this year it is from 19th to 23rd of January. So it wraps up today. And if we look at their website, which just to see really what this event, this meeting really is, we'll just look at that. But basically, it's an annual meeting where world leaders from government, business, civil society, etc., convene to engage in forward-looking discussions to address global issues and set priorities. The call for bold collective action makes the meeting particularly relevant. We'll see about that, but essentially, that is what their whole purpose is, really like a neoliberal gathering of imperialists. How to rule the world together.
And if you watched some of the world leaders' speech, it became pretty clear what it is about. I mean, this is just a very favorable description. It is an advertisement. It's propaganda, sheer propaganda. What we have there is countries saying we are the best to invest in. We are the best to make deals. It's a pitch platform. It's a pitch platform of neoliberal con artists and assholes who are treating the state as a private company and treating the world as a real estate agent that it's to be doing business with. So the whole thing is to treat politics as business, is to reduce politics to business, to reduce people to consumers and countries to pitching platforms. It's absolutely disgusting. I think this is a platform that should be eliminated if we want to have a bit of a fairer world. But it's there, and we need to break this down and be immune to those lies.
Yeah, it's essentially an imperialist forum. So it's where the imperialists plot world domination as well. They're trying to plot world domination. And as we can see actually from this particular annual meeting, the US empire, a lot of people have said this, and I just had a very interesting conversation with Radhika Desai that even suggests that the US empire never really achieved its aim of complete domination. But certainly, whatever you believe on that, it's domination, or even if it was a very precarious domination, it is waning. And we can see that very clearly in the dynamics that are happening, emerging from this Davos annual meeting, because the imperialists are fighting amongst themselves because they are having power shifting things, as they're realizing that essentially the imperialist project is no longer really benefiting all of the components of it. So the 49 countries in the global north, as defined by the Tricontinental Research Dossier, Hyperimperialism, a decadent, dangerous new stage, those countries are now realizing, you know what, this US imperialism that they've lived under for the past few decades, while not necessarily complete or really sustainable, is now cracking under their basically incompetence, arrogance, and just destructive nature. So I think my main takeaway, and I, see if you agree with me, but my big takeaway from this was that it really sort of shows the split in the world. On one hand, you have this sort of dependable leadership by China, but it's a leadership that's about a multilateral world, like steady, quiet, not dramatic sort of world where people can work together in a multilateral vision, which, we might be able to see in our lifetime, maybe. And then on the other hand, you have this global North US imperialist bloc that is absolutely going nuts. It is a circus. We're calling it a circus because it's very much a circus. People doing performative actions, people saying and stating random things. But it's all kind of just trying to sustain power that I think they're not going to be able to sustain, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think you hit the spot here when you say it's actually a clashing of two very different proposals for the world. One, there is this imperialism trying to hold on to power to whichever costs, whoever costs, how much it costs, even if it's our own destruction, we're going to go for it. And then the other side, we have the proposal of a multilateral world, which the Europe seems not to be able to engage, seems not to be able to understand or to respect or to question its own place. I think the European role here is absolutely shocking, because their level of vassalage is so explicit, and they carry on. They are the Marina Corina, whoever that bitch is named is.
Machado.
Marina Machado, that is, it's not, it dirties my mouth to speak her name, this woman. So that's what they're doing to the US. They are the Corina Machados of the US. And I think here there is a very important question that we're going to explore throughout the show. Is it really through the Greenland and through the Greenland issue and through all the issues Trump is causing, is Europe and US really, there's really a wedge being driven between them, or it's just a superficial tension? We need to go through and explore how much this is really a crisis within the empire, or how much this is just a superficial or a seismic, a momentary pickup of this, because they seem to have a lot in common, right? The level of hatred towards China and towards Russia. We're going to explore here. We're going to show what Merz said in Davos. I was shocked when I saw his video, what Ursula von der Leyen say in Davos. It makes me really, when I see Ursula von der Leyen talking, it gives me pause.
Well, why don't we just go into that?
Shouldn't be thinking,
I think we should go into that first off, and then I'll talk about how China is offering a different vision. But as you can see here, even CNN is putting this headline up: as Trump sows division, China says it's the calm, dependable leader the world needs, which is kind of a shocking, like, even though they're saying it's China says that, but the fact that it's in the headline is quite significant, I think. But let's go into what Trump has been doing. How is he sowing division? Let's sort of talk about that. So you mentioned two figures, and I think also we should talk about NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte. He also is a huge Trump. He's called Trump Daddy, and he's definitely acting as if Trump is the daddy. So, but first, let's go over the most shocking. You were saying the most shocking one, which was Chancellor Merz, or do you want to start with Ursula von der Leyen?
I think we can. I think it's very interesting because Trump is pulling back and forth with Greenland. First of all, he said he was going to militarily intervene in Greenland. Let's remember that Greenland already has, since I think 1951, American bases there. And it's really impressive that the Europeans sent 35 soldiers to fight against Trump, to fight against the largest military power in the world. I was thinking, oh wow, the 35 people that Europe sent, it's really making a presence and defending Greenland as shit.
It makes no sense, right? Because the US already has a military base there, so does Denmark, and the US already has complete access. So why are they defend? And they're all in NATO. So like, what?
And it's very interesting to have a NATO country threatening the other NATO country. It shows how belligerent their nature is. It's only belligerent nature. And it's also interesting, the argument that Trump displayed in Davos to have Greenland. For him, Greenland belongs to the US, for Canada. Canada will be surrounded by Alaska, United States, and Greenland. It was going to be a very dangerous place to live all around. But he's displaying the same arguments as Zionists. It historically belongs to us. It's not about 3,000 years ago, but it's almost a biblical. When Nazi Germany invaded Denmark, we were there to save Greenland, and we gave as a present to the Danish people who are so ungrateful now. Well, by the way, Greenland should not even belong to Denmark. Denmark was a colonial country that colonized Iceland, that colonized Greenland, and it should belong to the native Icelandic people. So it's so imperialist. You have Denmark, Europe, partition a land that doesn't belong to them. It belonged to the people of Greenland. This is the first point. And Trump is so ignorant that he called Greenland Iceland. It's different. It's completely different.
I mean, that's the thing, is that imperialism requires some sort of justification. And because it's never justified, it's never about the right, like a colonial power does not have a right to take the land. There's only a few sort of fake narratives that they can sell you. And of course, Zionism is was historically one of the most effective narratives of imperialism. Now it's no longer as effective. So it's kind of funny that Trump is not aware of that sort of rhetoric is no longer, I think, going to fly anymore. Which is why this whole thing where he first threatened tariffs across, like, I think 8 European countries, when he was like, you're not giving us Greenland, I'm going to tariff you. And then he's like walked that back now, according to supposedly a framework of a future deal. Can you think of something more ambiguous than a framework of a future deal? And of course, we don't know any details about this future deal, because
basically ambiguity, meaningless buzzwords, together.
Meaningless, yeah, exactly. So we have no idea what that is. We just sort of getting the idea that like Trump had to backtrack, and now we're here. However, just because he had to backtrack doesn't mean that he doesn't have his huge fans. Like you talked about Ursula von der Leyen. Can you talk us through what her reaction?
Let's hear Ursula von der Leyen. So she's the president of the European Commission. I'm going to talk a little bit about her. when I was living in Germany, she was the family minister. She's a kind of a hardcore Christian. She's from the Christian party of Germany. And now her reaction about this imperialistic resource disputes over Greenland was to call for new Arctic security architecture, whatever that means. Let's say food solidarity with Greenland, European investment surge in Greenland, cooperation with partners and wider Arctic security, strengthening security partnerships, whatever that means, Article strategy upgrade. So now, this was what the Portuguese colonizer did with Brazil. Occupy to colonize. Brazil, the Portuguese came here, they couldn't find gold straight away, so they left. It was too difficult to find the gold, so they left. And then other countries started to come, the French, the English, the Holland, the Dutch, the Spanish. And then they, no, Brazil belongs to us. Let's occupy to colonize. This is the same strategy. Let's occupy, let's make investments, whatever that means. Let's put our foot there in order to occupy the territory. This is very old colonizing tactics, very, very old. And let's hear what she said about Trump's threat.
Okay, curious. So she's saying this. Okay.
You just
this is
need
why
to put the sound on.
I don't know how to put it.
Yeah, you know how to put it. Look, yeah, and then
is it working?
The United States.
I can't hear it. But
you just need to go back.
Deal last July,
okay, sorry.
and Arctic security can only be achieved together. And this is why the proposed additional tariffs are a mistake, especially between long-standing allies. The European Union and the United States have agreed to a trade deal last July. And in politics, as in business, a deal is a deal. And when friends shake hands, it must mean something. Arctic security can only be achieved together.
I don't know, when I see Ursula von der Leyen, I need to pause. When I see her, she gives me chills only alone her figure, that you don't know if she is a nun, a very strict teacher in a Catholic school, that is absolutely horrific and autocratic, or if she looks like this very strict ballet teacher. She just gives me chills. I have, let's say, natural associations with her alone. Her physical appearance, I think it's absolutely traumatic. But Ursula von der Leyen, we need to talk about her. She was a no one. She was given the family ministry in Germany, which is family ministry. So hello, yeah, a meaningless one at under Helmut Kohl, and she was a bit of the moral, the woman that guards the moral, in the government. And she once wanted to put a very draconian law on freedom of speech in Germany back into the 2000s, but 2000, I don't know then, and this launched the largest petition against the Germany had in all times. So she had to receive the woman who did this petition. She wanted the draconian laws would be justified because there was a lot of child pornography. So Ursula von der Leyen had to receive the people making the petition. It was a political pressure on her. So do you know what she did? She invited them and she put a child in the table that was victimized and said, we can discuss, but we cannot say the word CP, child pornography. So she undermined the entire discussion by putting a child, a victim, in the table in order not to discuss. This is the level of hypocrisy, cruelty, and deception that this woman operates. And she is, I think, is the worst. She's dragging Europe down by militarizing Europe, by taking the European Union into a far-right path. And Ursula von der Leyen is really dangerous because she's an incompetent, moralistic, autocratic, empty-minded, with a lot of power in her hands. But I
in it as well to the US.
Yeah,
interests.
Yeah, completely subnote. And then she went on to European Parliament talking about independence. We need to strengthen our independence from the US. We need to do a new architecture. How much of it is really independence, or is just a concurring power? Because when it comes to Russia, when it comes to China, US and Europe are one. Let's have a look. Let's check what Chancellor Merz in Germany said about the Greenland issue. Let's see.
Including Denmark and the people of Greenland.
We need to
can
put
count
that.
on our solidarity.
You need to
hear it. Can you?
Go back.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
You can hear it. Okay.
Our neighbors and partners in Europe, including Denmark and the people of Greenland, can count on our solidarity. We will protect Denmark, Greenland, the North from the threat posed by Russia.
Posed by Russia. The threat,
Europe,
we're going to defend Greenland from the threat posed by Russia. By Russia. Look at the level, delusional level of them. And they still talk about the US as allies, as neighbor, as friends. I don't think there's a huge shift here.
There isn't a shift at all. I mean, also we have to remember that Trump on Truth Social did put, like, if we don't have Greenland, China and Russia, literally in capital letters, China and Russia will take Greenland. No evidence of this, of course. This is just a justification for further expansion and further belligerence. I think the thing of it is, and I think what Davos is kind of like showing here, is that it's not so much that these are competing powers, right? They are part of the imperial bloc. Now, whether or not they are lockstep with each other is kind of not the issue. They're both within an imperial system. And right now, that imperial system is not working as well for them. And so now you're seeing this type of individual, different leaders in different ways expressing their disdain or their discomfort with the fact that they're weak. And they want to be powerful again, essentially, right? But their strategy that they're using right now is not going to work. And I think a lot of these leaders are sort of understanding that. But we'll go a little bit deeper into Macron and Mark Carney's speeches, because I think they show a very interesting...
Before we go to Macron, I think you touch a very important point here. So when we see the press, generally the press, talking about this emerging dispute over Greenland resources, it's being often framed as a tension between the US, and some say it's a fault line in the transatlantic relations. Some are, I think there is an overstating here, this rupture. I think on core strategic questions, the two sides remain very closely aligned. Let's constrain China. Let's constrain Russia. They are both our enemies. And in Greenland, but not only in Greenland, in the Arctic, also in Latin America. I mean, Venezuela is an explicit point to show we don't want China having access to Venezuelan oil. We, US, cannot do much with the Venezuelan oil. It's a thick oil. We don't even have the means to use it, but China shouldn't be putting hands on it. So their interventionist postures towards Iran and Syria. They share a genocide in Gaza. They are actors in a genocide in Gaza. Let's not forget Gaza. They are doing this together, one in one. So this continuing material, political, military backing of Israel, war in Gaza, intelligence. So I think the real disagreement here is more about, as you say, modalities, methods, hierarchy. Who leads, who follows, who benefits from Greenland's strategic, geographic, and resource bases. So I think there has been an overstatement in the press about a rupture between the US. I don't buy that. I don't know what you think, but I don't buy that.
No, I think the thing of it is that of course, the press being a component of imperialist propaganda doesn't want you to understand what imperialism is. So they're going to pretend that each country is sort of individually fighting it out, including China and Russia. And really, that sort of in the public's mind, they're sort of perpetuating this idea that Russia and China are equal threats to US imperialism. And that is completely bananas. Like, that is just delusional in terms of the destructive nature of US imperialism and Western imperialism. So in terms of like the structure of imperialism, all these countries are imperialist and they have not invested in anything outside of the imperialist system. I mean, I had a really interesting interview with Finian Cunningham, which is currently on our Global Majority for Peace playlist. And we talk about his new book, Killing Democracy. And he talks about this covert operation in the 50s called Operation Gladio, where like COINTELPRO in the US, it was intelligence services from the US, UK, and also European intelligence that directly interfered with elections in Europe to make sure that communism and socialism could not advance. So this is why this makes sense decades later, right? And I mean, the operation lasted decades, but now it makes sense that we're here in 2026 and there are no socialist or communist systems in Europe, in the global north. They are a complete imperial bloc. But the issue that we're having here now is it's not sustainable because it's not really based on anything tangible. They've given up their productive forces to China. They're essentially mainly operating on this idea of propaganda. Like, the pillar of propaganda is what they're really depending on, and also military, granted, but the pillar of propaganda is like the one that they're using to try to exert their control. And it's just crumbling because the material conditions are crumbling with the fact that, you know, they're not producing anything for the people, and they're never going to, because they're completely capitalist. Imperialism being the high stage of capitalism, the whole focus is on hoarding capital and expanding capital. That's it. They don't give about people. I just censored myself.
Yeah,
about people,
and
right?
I think when you talk about propaganda is when you propagandize, you start believing your own shit. You start believing your own propaganda, and that's where the dangers lies. Let's say, I think a most telling example is the sanctions on Russia. They just lift this very, very heavy stone to just let it fall on their own feet, because now Germany is extremely expensive. The cost, I was watching a documentary of 5 people in Germany, a family of 5 living in one bedroom. One bedroom means a studio.
Oh
and the children, and they are working people like us, you know, like they're middle class people living in Frankfurt in a one bed, and the children's room is above the hall. They build a room above the hall for the children. This is what is happening in Germany. This is unheard of. This is unthinkable for German standards. Germany has hit hard with inflation. And if you see, there's several automotive shutdowns announcement and closures as of now, 23 of January 2016. So you have the permanent shutdown of Volkswagen in Dresden. You have Ford in Saarlouis Louis shutting down. You have Continental. It's a tech, is based Germany-based automotive supplies components. You have the AE Group in Gerstungen and in Hessen shutting down, and then you have Goodyear shutting down, and you have also temporary shutting downs like Volkswagen in Zwickau, Volkswagen in Wolfsburg, it's close to Berlin. So what we're seeing in Germany is the deindustrialization, and not because of China, but because of their sanctions to Russia. Now they are buying gas. And I think Trump is deluded, but not that much. Have you carefully see where he puts the emphasis in his speech in Davos? Energy. He's saying, look, Europe, you have bought the super left, the radical left Green Deal scam, and you stop drilling. You have no energetic sovereignty. We just got Venezuela. We just got this and that. We are going for energetic sovereignty and resources sovereignty, and you are not. You are completely dependent on energy of others. You want to go to this fake what he calls scam Green Deal, and he put salt on the wound of Europe, your energetic system, and that's it. Germany is buying Russian gas through India.
I mean, this is the issue: is that the U.S. creates the conditions of chaos and disaster, and then blames everybody else for living in that disaster. But I have to say the most important thing about that, why is the U.S. so against green energy, is because China is the leading green energy investor and also developer, innovator, etc. And it is such a short-term strategy for the U.S. because every single thing that we're facing, even by the U.S.'s admission, are to do with this sort of like energy, the need for more energy, essentially. Like AI, for example, AI requires so much energy. And if you're going to be forever in this loop of never using green energy, never producing your own sustainable energy source, you're going to be forever in these types of like land grabs, colonization thing, which is precisely what they want, because that is their model. They have people within those structures that are benefiting greatly from that. And I think that to answer your initial question of, is there a rupture? Is there genuine? The issue that we're having here is that the U.S. is declining in power. And so it's kind of fighting on two fronts. One part, which is what we're seeing and the media is sort of suggesting is like, real fractures in the empire, is the U.S. trying to assert its domination over the imperial bloc. This is not going that well because the U.S. is declining by itself, right? The U.S. country and its strategies are not working. So as they're trying to control the rest of the global north, we're seeing a fight there. And then beyond that, the global North bloc is also trying to control the rest of the world, and they're not doing very well there.
And by the way, as you say in energy in China, I think you hit the spot. They are so against it because China is leading. China is making out of garbage energy. They are even going to buy garbage in other places to feed in their energy plants that they are doing. It's impressive, and this is in a very short amount of time. They are investing in research. If you look at the list of the main universities in the world, Harvard is now third place, and out of 10 universities, 9 are Chinese because they are heavily investing in research. And Trump and Europe, but Trump the very anachronic view of the world. He thinks the more we need a lot of energy. No, I think the thinking is we need devices that consume as little energy as possible, and we are going to invest on devices that consumes as little as possible. It's not about more, and as you say, this land grabbing. They need the land grabbing. They need the colonization because they don't know how to operate resources well. And they in a very anachronic manner.
They don't have an incentive to try either. So that's the other.
It's right. Yeah.
The other problem too. And I mean, it's so significant that green energy investments for the global South, because there's a lot, like for example, Cuba. I mean, we're going to get to
80% of Brazilian energy is green energy. 80%.
It's so important for the sovereignty of a country to have its own source of energy. It cannot be overstated how important that is. So before João comes on, though, I just want to sort of elucidate, I hope we have time to go over President Macron's transcript
God,
because it is okay. First of all, he's wearing aviator glasses, which I think was just what everyone was talking about.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think most of the European leaders that came to Davos, they look like accountants, like very stupid accountants with very monolithic worldviews. But Macron looks always as a playboy. He can't help himself, can he? He looks as a playboy. Doesn't matter where he steps in, how he steps. Look at that with his Ray-Ban. Is it Ray-Ban glasses?
It's farcical. I think it's aviators. I don't know what brand it is, and we're not being paid, so no product.
Why is he doing that? Why is it? Was it justification to go with this? I don't know, half businessman, half playboy outfit to the annual meeting of Davos. I mean,
there's a rumors around why.
He's definitely a handsome man. As long as he doesn't open his mouth, he pass as handsome. But okay, he, in a place that everybody looks like an accountant, to come like that, it is a shocker in itself. He doesn't even to say much. But go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So I think like we're gonna contrast and compare two speeches if we have time. This one is by Macron, and then the other one is by Canadian, the PM of Canada, Mark Carney, which is really interesting because Canada is positioning itself, I think, out of necessity, but it's positioning itself slightly as an outlier right now in the global north. But this first transcript of Macron, I think what was interesting about it is what you just said earlier, is that Europeans are not in line with multilateralism. They're not, but however, they're using the terms. And this is a very common propaganda playbook thing. They will use the word and distort it for their own purposes.
Oh yeah. And a great example of this is the Mercosur agreement that the European Parliament just barred. And Merz, the German chancellor, went ballistic about it. I'm so in favor of the Mercosur agreement. We need to push for multilateralism with the Mercosur agreement. That now I'm against this agreement. Alone the fact that these people are pushing for, so they are seeing the level of failure and trying to compensate with this fake engagement in multilateralism. They cannot see anyone as equal, Ileana. Ileana, did you know what? They can't see it. We are never equal in Europe,
No, because I think this is the key thing, is that if you do not acknowledge the Western imperialism and your part in it, which actually, interestingly, Mark Carney does in his speech, he does, but there's a complicity within that. He doesn't, not necessarily, he acknowledges complicity. So it's a very interesting speech. But in this Macron speech, this is a masterclass in how propaganda works. He uses terms like multilateralism. But the multilateralism, like to your point, the multilateralism that Europe is using is only to say we do not want the US to have dominion over us. That's the only multilateralism. It's not multilateralism. It's just simply like, we want to be more powerful and have more influence than the US. And they're using multilateralism
just to protect their own hierarchy within the imperialistic system. That's it now hurts me. Now I want to antagonize a little bit with you. They play games antagonizing with each other all the time. When Ursula von der Leyen goes and say we need our independence, it's just verbal antagonization. In the end, Trump said we share civilization. Trump said this in Davos. We share civilization with Europe. It's a great place. I don't recognize it, but it's a great place. It's antagonizing. It's antagonizing, and it's superficial.
Yeah, it's really superficial, and it's posturing. They're trying to be like, oh, we're not the little puppy of the US. We are actually strong. They're trying to have some sort of pushback in that. But I think the
campaign of imperial campaign in Latin America, and we are the fathers and the idealizers of an imperial world. Therefore, it belongs to us and forever will. And that's how we look at the other cultures in our incredibly self-righteous arrogance.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to look at it a little bit more carefully when we are examining this type of propaganda, because it's very effective too. And one of the things he does here, I'm going to quote from this speech, and then I do see Zhao in the studio, so we'll go to him before going to the Canadian speech. But I'm just going to quote from Macron's speech. He says here that he's sort of here in this, just to set it up, he's basically saying what we've been saying, that imperialism is the same as China, what China actions are, what Russia's actions, they're all the same. They're all threats, right? So he says that American overconsumption, Chinese underconsumption and overinvestment, and European underinvestment and lack of competitiveness. These imbalances are also reflected in development gaps. And we can no longer settle for aid that neither delivers sufficient results nor enables countries to escape poverty. So in that thing, he's kind of suggesting that these three things, China's underconsumption and overinvestment is one of the threats to the imbalances. That is so ridiculous. Can you imagine? So by doing this, he's kind of saying, like, let's be the adults in the room, because China also being, they're being, in a way, like they're being aggressive by underconsumption and overinvestment, and the US imperialism is just called overconsumption. And you know what I mean? Like, he's putting these three things as if they are equal threats here, when really the main issue that we're having is US imperialism. That is the main issue that we're having. Even in terms of China's supposed underconsumption and overinvestment, if Trump did not do his Liberation Day last year, we wouldn't be in this $1.2 trade surplus, $1.2 trillion trade surplus issue that China currently reported for 2025. I don't think that number would have occurred had Trump not done his Liberation
And I
Day.
think something very obvious that they're missing out is how China divides what it gets. It divides on education, on health, invests on science. I think that's the thing that they're not understanding. It's not to treat land as a corporation that you only suck, and get profits out of it. And I think this is an element that people who sees politics as business and countries as corporation cannot. It's outside of their consciousness. They are so trapped in this monolithic view of the world that they cannot understand other different views, different realities. It's not a different interpretation of the world. It's a different reality that China is creating, and they are not capable of contemplating it and reflecting on it and think, wow, maybe there are different ways of doing things than the way we've been doing again and again, over again, wrongly. They are happy to go on a spiral down. I went to Germany, I went to the UK, Spain. I felt the world that I can see. I have to agree with Trump. I can't recognize Europe. It felt decadent. It did feel decadent.
I mean, for sure, it's declining. But the thing is, the solution is not to just block China. The reason they can't compete with China in the first place is because there's no investment in their own production capacity. Productive economy. There's no investment in their people. There's no investment in their education. So of course you can't compete with China. China's not the problem. You're the problem. Your elites are raping your countries, and that's the problem. That's why you can't compete. It's not to do with China actually investing in their own people. Now, obviously, China is huge, so it's not a matter. Obviously, even if you did everything right, you can't necessarily compete with China, but you don't have to. That's the point. You shouldn't be competing with China as an adversary. There's no reason to at all. So that's the issue that we're having, these imperialists that cannot let go of their imperialist nature. That's essentially the biggest problem that we have.
They can't reflect, they can't pause, they can't reflect. It's absolutely unbelievable. I've just seen Spain, there is a tweet by Spain complaining that Brazil now have 4 indications for the Oscar. How come Brazilians, ultra-nationalists, this is one of, it's absolute absurd. I just received this from my editor, Kiko, and he was looking at here. So look at the superiority of the Spaniards towards South America. It's called Premios Oscar, Oscar prizes. They are saying in the academia there's a lot of Brazilians, and they all very ultra nationalist. I think the Brazilians are an issue to the Oscar, and they all vote for themselves. I don't know. They don't know where they have been put themselves on. So basically, it is a very badly poor free translation of mine. Basically, they are saying Brazilians are in the Oscar because they are ultra nationalists. No, because we have a blooming cinema industry. They're talking about very difficult thematics. Secret Agent is about a dictatorship in Brazil, and we have a right to that memory. We have a right to remember, and we are talking about our own wounds in a much more artistic and visceral manner than Europe is. Art in Europe is become propaganda, is become soft power. It lost its nature, and nobody better to talk about that than João Amorim. João, show us your handsome face. Why are you there? And we can't see
maybe
you.
He stepped away for a little bit.
It's your way. João, calling João, Department 5 at Waitrose, João Amorim.
What a good segue. João, hello, nice to see you. Welcome to Empire Watch. We thought this would be a good segue. Sara sort of queuing you up for Brazilian filmmakers. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
João, first of all, it's a great pleasure to have you here. We're very happy to have you. We have presented your full CV right at the beginning of the show. I don't know, for those who weren't here right in the beginning, João is a filmmaker, American-Brazilian filmmaker. Can I say you're America, or is it staying on your CV?
In your bio.
In your bio. Well, we're both British here as well from passport. So thanks for being here with us. And João, I'm going to start with, I was just saying this to Ileana, it's crazy, the superiority that European look towards the global South. This is something for you. Look at that. Well, Oscar prizes. So this side is saying that in the academy, there's a bunch of Brazilians, and they are all ultra nationalists. And that Brazilian is sort of a stone in the shoe of the Oscars, because they all vote for each other. This is in reference of the Brazilian nomination, 4 times nomination, Secret Agent, a film that talks about the dictatorship. Your take on that, João?
Well, first of all, Secret Agent is an amazing film, so I think it has all the merits to be in the Oscar. I don't think it was, Brazilian, because of Brazilian people being involved in this choice. Well, first of all, good morning or good afternoon, Ileana and Sara. I think there's always a sense of superiority there. I mean, I think the biggest proof of that was doing the awards about a week or two ago, where the Cinema Awards? I don't remember the name of the Critics' Choice. And during the Critics' Choice, the award was given to Kleber during the red carpet.
Yes.
Right? It was
shocking.
It was very shocking, because last year, that was very shocking. I think that's even, crazier than this article, but it's, there has always been a sense of superiority from, Europeans and, United Statesians towards people from the global South in general, certainly from Brazil. But, I've seen the film. I think it's fantastic. I don't know if you guys have seen it. But
I'd love to see it.
I didn't see it, but I loved it.
I'm going to take your recommendation then. But I just want to set you up because we're going to clip this out. So I just want to say welcome, João Amorim. I'm sorry if I still don't know how to say your name, but I'm just going to say your bio again. João is a Brazilian-American filmmaker, producer, and animator focused on social and environmental storytelling from the perspective of the global South. He directed Utopia Tropical, featuring Noam Chomsky and Celso Amorim, which we have said that is your father, and the 2012 documentary Time for Change. It was 2012 Time for Change, a documentary on sustainability and transformation featuring David Lynch, Sting, Elliot Page, and Gilberto Gil. His recent work includes Pesticides Without Borders, with researcher Larissa Bombardi, which premiered at COP30 and engages directly with grassroots movements. Now, there is the rest of the bio, really interesting too, that you did the Brazilian Sesame Street, but it's actually in the description below here, including the website for your production company and also the Instagram, so people can follow along and see your projects and get to actually understand it a little bit more. So I encourage people to check that out. But welcome, João. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the nice introduction.
Well, so we have been talking a lot about Davos. We haven't finished talking. I was joking to Sara before we went live that there's so much craziness happening in Davos that we could probably have like a 3-hour stream just on that. But we have you here for something different, which is basically an update on what's happening in Venezuela and Cuba and the surrounding countries in that region. We obviously, like a few weeks ago when the kidnapping of President Maduro happened, it was just so horrific and scary. And I personally was very, very worried about what was happening. But I think as the dust is somewhat settling, we can see that maybe it was more of like a shock and awe type of operation, and maybe not necessarily a successful regime change operation. It was more, it was more just to sort of exert dominance, but not a real concrete, genuine ability to exert dominance. So we'll see what you think about that. But to give some perspective, because during that time, people were like, why isn't China doing anything? Why isn't Russia doing anything? And I want to give some context to the audience that in 2023, China and Venezuela elevated their relationship to an all-weather strategic partnership. And China, unlike the US, when they actually give these sort of categorizations, or when they actually announce things like this in their official statements, it's a serious thing. This is the highest diplomatic designation. It's not just talk, that's not how China does their official statements. So Venezuela is by far China's biggest recipient of loans in Latin America, with over $110 billion in loans. They still have about $10 billion outstanding, I think, or more, but it's been a very successful sort of loan agreements that they've had. The next biggest recipient is actually Brazil, and with 3 times less. So that just shows you how significant the relationship between China and Venezuela is. And so I believe that, it's not a matter of if China will support Venezuela. It's a matter of how and also we don't know yet, because the way China works is they're not going to announce something when it's not in place, and they're not going to do it as a reaction. They're going to think it through and then they will roll it out. So it's kind of a very, very different strategy from the US. What I would love to know from you and get your insight in, João, is like, what is the response of the other countries in that region, especially as many are now in the US's express crosshairs, with the pretext of narco-terrorism, the Donroe Doctrine, the Trump corollary, and also, we talked about it a few weeks ago, Sara, like the Rio massacres is very much part of this narco-terrorism thing. So we know that Brazil is part of the crosshairs too. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I wish there would be a more cohesive voice, at least from South America. But I think the honest answer is that South America and Latin America doesn't have a single voice anymore. Recently we have a deeply divided continent because of this wave of right-wing electoral victories all over the place, right? Chile, Bolivia, and so forth. So I think, some countries like Brazil and Colombia and Mexico, others as well, but, those 3 they were very critical to this Washington posture of framing this in narco-terrorism enforcement, But on the other hand, on the other extreme, we have countries like Argentina, to talk about Milei a little bit, who are on the extreme opposite, right? And they were celebrating what happened. So I think there used to be a more, at some point, maybe 15, 20 years ago, a more cohesive view of things in Latin America. But unfortunately, that has changed, and we have a very divided continent. So, I think Brazil and Mexico and Colombia have had a great attitude, criticizing, and also, just showing to the world how, the importance of sovereignty, and if we open this, if, sovereignty and non-intervention, is still a central principle, then there should be no military intervention wherever, certainly not in Latin America that has, we've called it, like this continent of peace for the past few decades. So it's crazy, and I think the world has changed forever after the 3rd of January.
I want to show you something. We're talking about, we don't like wars in Latin America, definitely not. I think last time Brazil went into war was against Paraguay. It was 2 centuries ago or something. We don't have a tradition of militarization, which is something I want to touch upon with you as well. Shouldn't Brazil change its national security? We saw Venezuela, we saw a kidnapping of Maduro in its own ground. Venezuela is not a neighbor to the US. Neither is Brazil, but Brazil is a neighbor to Venezuela. So my question to you, I'm going to show you a video, but my question to you is, shouldn't Brazil be rethinking its national security? Shouldn't Brazil be thinking about their nuclear program? It feels like a national security threat to us, what happened in Venezuela. Venezuela is a left-wing country, and I definitely... it's a revolutionary country. Brazil isn't one, but we know if they go for Venezuela, they will go for Gustavo Petro, they will go for Lula, maybe not with military action, but with intervention. Let me show you something here. Look at this beach. Sorry, I have no other words for this woman, Marina Correa. I don't like to pronounce her name. I block her name from my subconsciousness. Let's watch her.
So much.
Dirt is my mind.
It's a huge honor to be here on behalf of the Venezuelan people and also our president-elect, Edmundo González Urrutia, to tell you, first and foremost, that Venezuela will be free. And once we liberate Venezuela, we will keep working and we will have a free Cuba and a free Nicaragua. And as you were saying, for the first time in history, we have the Americas free of communism, of dictatorship and narco-terrorism. This is a historic moment. And we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for, yes, the commitment, resilience, generosity and courage of the Venezuelan people, but also because we have counted with the support, vision, and courage of incredible leaders, such as the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and members of this Honorable Congress. Our friends, Mario Díaz-Baral, Carlos Jiménez, and Marielle Salazar, trusted the Venezuelan people from day one. When many thought our struggle was impossible, when many thought it was impossible to defeat this narco-terrorist regime, when many told us to give up, you trusted the Venezuelan people for the right reasons, because freedom always prevails. Ours is an existential fight for life. It's an ethical fight for the truth, and it's a spiritual fight for good. And that's why we will prevail. So I want to thank the American people most of all. We're here in the House of the People. It's such an honor to be in this institution. We share the principles, the values that build this nation that are the same that our founding fathers believed and defended in Venezuela. and those that will turn our country into the strongest ally the United States have ever had in the region. And once we do that, once we achieve a democratic and free Venezuela, we will see millions of our children coming back home. And that's our goal. That's the force that moves us. It's the force of love, which is the most powerful possible. So thank you very much. I'm very grateful. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for true believers in freedom and democracy. And once again, thank you to the American people, to the American government, and to the American Congress. Thank you.
So, João, we have plenty of Maria Corinas in Brazil ready to jump in. So I was wondering, shouldn't we be rethink? Well, look, Brazil has not accepted Venezuela in the BRICS, has not recognized Maduro as a president. In a way, my point of view is that we have isolated Venezuela and make it more vulnerable. And by making Venezuela more vulnerable, but you feel free to agree with me, we're making ourselves more vulnerable, the Latin American integration more vulnerable, and people like Maria Corina to giving a stage and maybe a Nobel Peace Prize. She remembers me those Miss Universe pageantry where they say, I want the world peace, like this look how precious she is, how gracious she is. I want the world peace and democracy and freedom and Latin America from the narco traffickers that makes my life impossible here in Washington. So so should Brazil be rethinking its national security strategy in your point of view?
Well, that's a very complex question. I think, as I said, South America has been, long held belief that it was a continent of peace, and that has been shaken, but by what happened on January 3rd in Caracas. I think the abduction or the kidnapping of Maduro, a sitting president, regardless of, if you believe the elections were fraud or not, but he was the sitting president, it signals to a new level of escalation, I think, closer to what happened in Iraq, to what we've seen in Latin America during recent political crisis in the continent. So, it's a very good question. At the same time, I think Brazil particularly has adopted this strategic posture, framed on the existential bet of peace, right? And it's rooted in our constitutional principles, and we've always spoke to try to resolve things in a peaceful manner. But at the same time, yes, is there a chance that the U.S. does something similar to other countries in Latin America? Cuba, there's definitely threatening. They threatened Colombia. As you said, in Brazil, they might have different strategies, trying to rig the elections or, using social media and so forth to gear the election in one direction.
And the elections are coming up, right?
They're coming up. Yeah, we have elections this year, and Lula's margin is actually very small right now. It was like a month ago was like 12 points. The last thing I saw was like 4 or 5. It was out of sun, so it's not. We didn't win that game yet, And
would you say that the political opponents are more likely to be U.S. backed, U.S. puppets? And Lula is really the only one that is kind of, he's not US backed, obviously, but, he's trying very hard to maintain equilibrium in this extremely dangerous situation, right? But that is already seen by the US as complete and utter, dissidence. Like he is already going to be an enemy number one in Brazil, because he's like, even trying to balance the forces is not enough subservience to the US. So it's a tricky one.
Yeah. I think the US and Trump especially, but the US in general, never respects subservience. That's I think the reason that Brazil managed to to have the, a lot of the tariffs being cut down is because we're not subservient. I think, in fact, if you look at Bolsonaro, who was extremely subservient, or Zelensky, they're humiliated by Trump and by U.S. presidents. And so I think to be able to it's dangerous to have a very explicit, left-wing regime, which Lula, I can't say he does. He has, policies towards, fighting inequality and feeding the hungry and so forth. But it's nothing like China, for instance, not like Venezuela or Cuba, not even like Colombia. So I think the strategy here, the strategy here is going to be more around, trying to influence the elections, coercion, not necessarily the use of force. Having said that, the U.S. is an empire in decline, and us, our military has been trained by the U.S. military. Lots of our weapons are U.S. produced. So I think that's very dangerous. They can have a button in Washington, turn everything off. And there has been movements towards, changing that, like the deal we have with Saab for airplanes, for fighter jets, with transfer of technology. And I think certainly, closer conversations with the BRICS around, security are important. I think it's a very dangerous and tricky position for South America and for Brazil especially, because we have, China as our, biggest economic partner, and then we have the U.S. right here, who wants our rare earth and our oil and water and the Amazon. So it's and now, with them in Venezuela, depending on what happens there, almost our neighbor. In the map that Trump showed recently, they'd be our neighbor, right? We're right south of the border. So it's a very important question. I think it's important that we invest in our national defense industry. I don't know about nuclear weapons. I mean, I hate war, and I think anything around the potential of a nuclear war, to me, sounds terrible. And I think we're closer to it than we have been in many years, probably since the Cold War. But at the same time, is if you have the nukes, you can point them there, and
You can.
it gives you a certain credibility with.
I think you need a lot of in place, stability in place before that's such an extreme weapon to use. But if your government stability is not there, then you're gonna
in one hand we see what you don't do with people who have we see what we don't do. India no longer does to Pakistan. We see what nobody does to North Korea. But imagine if Bolsonaro with a nuke in his hands.
I mean, Pakistan
it is an internal danger for sure. But it feels like we have reached a paradigm when in Trump, I was hearing Alistair Cook, a British diplomat, talking about the Trump enterprises, his monopoly game or his war game. And he was saying he went to Venezuela and it was so easy to remove, apparently to kidnap Maduro. The Venezuelans explained this as the security advantage, the cyber technological advantage that the US has over all other countries, which makes us believe that this is now a key point of sovereignty, to have a cybersecurity, to have your internet managed. We have here in Brazil Starlinks. If you watch even DCM, you see the propaganda, it's Starlink, the advertisement. So how is Brazil dealing with the cybersecurity in your view? Are we having changes? Are we becoming more sovereign? Or could the US intervene here?
Well, I don't think we've done enough in cybersecurity, for sure. I mean, we've seen what happened with Dilma. She was spied by the U.S. government, right? And I think that still happens. As long as we're using WhatsApp and Meta tools, we're being spied at, right? So I'm a big defender that we should, start create our own social networks. I mean, I think one of the strengths that people, of China is exactly that. They're on Red Note instead of Instagram, and they have a control over social media. In Brazil, if you talk about control over social media, immediately the extreme right will say you're trying to establish censorship, right? So it's a very tricky game. But we see what's happening. We had recently about lots of accounts of left-wing politicians being shadow banned in Brazil, like Manuela Dávila and Boulos and so forth. So I don't think we have a good cybersecurity. We have an organization that is CERPRO, which is fantastic, right? It could be taken more seriously by the rest of the government. And we have, a deal with China as well to provide, in a few years, free satellite internet in Brazil, and hopefully, challenge Musk. But I think, it all brings back to a very important point that Ileana made about the lack of cohesion that Brazil has as a nation. Right, and we're a very volatile democracy to this day. So it goes to answer all of these things. If for 4 years you have an extreme, sorry for the term, psycho fascist like Bolsonaro, and then you have Lula, it's kind of this schizophrenic thing, where you go back and forth, you dismantle the government, and then you try to rebuild it again. It's very tricky. So, I know for a fact that the Brazilian governments have deals with these companies like Google and other big techs, so I think there should be, and it would be great if we could have, a change there. But it's very hard because it's not something that happens based on Lula or an executive decision. It has to go through Congress, which is, probably the worst Congress we've ever had, extreme right wing right now. And when you talk about there's been a lot of debate in the past year around the regulation of, for instance, VOD platforms, and also of the big techs and artificial intelligence. And there's a huge lobby in Congress that fights for the exact opposite. So it's not tricky. I mean, we have to re-elect Lula because he's the best option we have right now. All the other candidates, as Ileana pointed out, are coming from the right or extreme right. There won't be this year a new name that has a chance against them. So we have to get him elected, but we have to be very, very cautious, especially about the Senate. I think that's going to be a crucial run in Brazil because it's the Senate that can change our judiciary system and our, Supreme Court, like it has happened in the U.S., and there's certainly, I think the extreme right probably knows they have small chances of winning for president, but they have a big chance of having majority of Senate, and even the 2/3 of the majority to be able to do whatever they want and kind of, toss our constitution. So I think there needs to be a lot of more attention towards that. There's a very passionate type of movements that people have when we have presidential elections, and you only think about that. And I mean, that's exactly what happened in 2022, where we elected Lula, but we have more than 2/3 of the Congress that represent, what we call the BBB,
the bullet, the beef, and the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. Now it's BBBB, right? There's a fourth B because of the bets, the gambling. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like we have, 70 to 80% of the Congress that is really representing, evangelical churches, people that are pro weapons, the agribusiness, you know,
we have Glenn Greenwald, journalist, lawyer, pushing for a dismantling of the Brazilian judiciary and asking for even intervention in Brazil. We have people on
I thought
like
he's a
Glenn Greenwald, the best paid journalist in Brazil.
Yeah.
But can I clarify something, since I admit to being quite ignorant about the Brazilian political system? I guess I have two questions here. One, if Lula is, or when, hopefully when Lula is elected again, do you foresee it's possibly his last term, because he's 80, right? You're saying, so it's most probably his last term. Do you think he can actually make bigger adjustments, bigger, bolder actions? And also, I know you talked about the Senate and the majority and stuff, but is it like the US where there is executive decision? I don't know. You mentioned executive decisions, but how much can Lula actually utilize that function?
It's limited. It's similar, in fact, to the US, you know, so it's very important to have a majority in both, you know, in the Congress in general, both the House of Representatives, you know, which is Câmara dos Deputados, and the Senate. There's only so much the president can do without Congress. You know, yes, he can. There's some decrees he can put in place, but it's very. I mean, it's crucial that, for instance, we were talking about the regulation of the big techs, right? That's something that needs to go through Congress. You know, if you don't have an alliance there, if you don't have the presidency and the executive government, they might want to change it, but they can't. It has to go through Congress. You know, Congress can vote against it, and the president can veto it, and then it goes back. And the third time, if it goes around, then the president can't veto it again, right? So we need to have a strong Congress, and that's, I think, the trickiest thing that we have to fight for as far as a democracy here in Brazil. And I think it's one of the reasons, you know, the fact that we have this unstable democracy is one of the reasons we haven't truly developed, you know, and that's why, you know, we're still a country that basically is exporting commodities, you know,
right,
crashing the earth, destroying the environment, to sell, you know, soy and beef to the US, to China, to the European Union, you know, to the whole world. But we, you know, it's very different than what happened in China. You know, if you look at China, in, you know, Brazil, Chinese engineers used to come to Brazil in the 80s and look at Itaipu, our big hydropower dam, and think, wow, that's amazing. That's the exact opposite. You know, we haven't really developed since then, you know, to talk numbers, in 94, you know, Brazil's GDP was higher than China, you know, look what it is now. And a lot has to do with this. Without it, we don't have an ability of planning, you know, so even like for defense reasons, as Sara pointed out, you know, would it be strategic to have a better military, to have a, you know, nuclear weapon, or, you know, to be able to defend ourselves from, you know, the invasion of the US or other, you know, powers, probably the US. But that has to do with having, you know, I think a development, a country that really wants to develop itself. And we don't see that right now. I mean, I think Lula is fighting hunger, as I said, improved, you know, education, gave more, all this identitary issues, you know, giving more opportunities to indigenous people, women. It's all great, you know, but, you know, when it comes to, I think, the big structural changes that we need to have, you know, we can't plan, because then you have 5 years and then if something changes, or you don't have a majority in Congress, you know, so we're stuck in this, you know, kind of neo-colonial type of economics.
That's so interesting because one of the biggest criticisms against Xi Jinping is that he got rid of the term limits. And I admit that when I heard that the first time years ago, I was like, oh my God, he's a dictator. You know, I really did actually.
I would vote for Xi Jinping if you run against Lula.
But now I'm realizing
I would vote for Xi Jinping if he runs against Lula. I vote for him.
Yes, I mean, the thing is, obviously no, but the thing is, right, like I'm realizing now that that is just, you really, how are you going to have a sovereign country if you're not shoring up the foundation of the country? And that's the issue. The 5-year term limit, it really causes great disruptions. I mean, there are things that you've already pointed to that could happen. Well, I don't know if they can happen because, like you're saying, tech sovereignty is perhaps the biggest key here. And it's not about censorship. Like it's not like we're advocating for censorship, right? We like to talk, but it's more like we're advocating for each country to have ownership over their information streams. Like, why should Meta go into any country and hold their terms of US imperialism, impose their terms on any country? That's why Meta is not allowed in China, because they refuse to adhere to Chinese laws and regulations. And every country should be able to determine that for themselves. So I just want to really clarify for anyone who's watching and going like, oh, you hate freedom of speech. It's not about freedom of speech itself. It's about the US propaganda tools of so-called freedom of speech, the weaponization of misinformation that destabilizes other countries.
And we have seen in Brazil, right? I think in Brazil we'll face, just to add to what João is saying, I think in Brazil we have a silent, constant building up US meddling. It's called Neo-Pentecostal Church. They educate people, they enter in institutions, they enter in parliaments, they became major, they became president. Yeah. And that's the way people start seeing the entire world. The entire world is shaped by this brainwash machinery that was introduced in Latin America by CIA to counter the revolutionary movement of the liberation theology, the communists. And Maria Corina Machado, this Miss Universe, she's a product of that. And so, João, we have a silent dominator called the Neo-Pentecostal Church. In my view, need to be destroyed, dismantled through economical strangling. So the children are educated in this church. This church brainwashes people, and when democracy comes, or when human rights comes, when debate comes, it's too much for them. It's all figured out through the American religious belt, the south of the United States, imported to Brazil. We have a huge fight here, João. I don't know. I feel so scared. I feel so scared by these people. They look harmless. You can sit with them. You can have a coffee. They will talk about baby Jesus. They will talk about something else, but they will be very kind and very nice, and they will feel very harmless, but they aren't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's very dangerous to become us versus them, create this kind of scenario. But you're absolutely right. I think there has been a movement that started in the U.S. with, with Paul Weyrich in the 70s, who was an advisor to the White House, a newborn Christian advisor. That I think first was Nixon, but then later was Reagan and Bush as well. He clearly pointed out how the evangelical community could become support the Republican Party if the Republicans changed their discourse, right? And I think that started in the 70s and it still goes on today, and it's basically. They started talking, the right wing, instead of talking about the economic policies, talking about, whatever fiscal reform or, changing working rights. You talk about, cultural issues, and you talk about religion, the right of, if you can or not, have an abortion, or gun rights, or gay marriage, all of the things become the main focus of an election. And it's certainly strengthened by these churches, and I think they were brought in, as you said, in the 70s, and they became their own monster in Brazil with Igreja Universal, Assembleia de Deus, with Bispo Edir Macedo constructing an empire, similar to what Pat Robertson did in the United States. And I think it's a global phenomenon. It's I think also the one thing that we have to look at is that these churches are exerting a role that the left-wing or progressive governments have failed to do, which is giving people a sense of community, or giving a sense that they belong somewhere. As you said, in the 70s, you had in Brazil, the Catholic movement, around the Igreja da Libertação, Teologia da Libertação, and very progressive movements in the Catholic Church, but we don't really have that anymore, right? So those are gone, and people, when they're having issues in their lives, they're out of a job, or they have issues with alcohol, they go to church, people are gonna be there for them, and that sense of belonging is something that we need to provide. And I think that war you're talking about has to be fought on that level, and that starts, in my opinion, with public education and fundamental basic education, high school and fundamental, from preschool on, not just universities. I think, in Brazil particularly, we did a lot to improve access to universities, but, the average public school is still terrible, And in the meantime, we have, since we have many extreme right-wing governors, they're implementing on their end the militarization of schools, right? Introducing religious, Christian religion in public schools, So something needs to be done. And that's something that could be done.
We need to add that the military in Brazil is still indoctrinated by the US. They think it's total indoctrination by the U.S. military. They don't have a revolutionary Bolivarian army. We have them reproducing American speech with waving American flags and eating chips in a couch and getting fat.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the danger of talking about weapons and militarization and all that. I think you pointed out a very big point. I mean, not only the military, but the Brazilian police, both civil and military police, is extremely right-wing and brainwashed, So what are the chances, if we were more militarized, that these forces would turn themselves against the population? I mean, we almost saw that on January 8th, 2022. Right, so that needs to happen, and again, that can only happen if we have a progressive Congress. Because Lula by himself, he can't say, okay, we're going to do a military reform, and now they're going to have to read Paulo Freire, and they're going to have to read about social justice and human rights. It's not going to happen. This guy, if there would be a war, they would be on Trump's side against the Brazilian population. I mean, that's how far right our military and our police are. That's a fact. I mean, if you try talking to them, and you're not going to find, many, if any, progressive thinkers within the military or the police forces in Brazil. And that comes down to education as well. It comes down
to the bright side of Brazil. When I wake up and I look at the window, I think Bolsonaro is in prison. Bolsonaro is eating prison food. Bolsonaro is only watching football. Bolsonaro cannot go for a walk, and he's there, a putschist. We have put the military under the scrutiny of the judiciary system. We have put the coupists under the judiciary system for the first time. And it's so, I don't know, do you feel happy when you think, is it wrong to feel happy when we think about Bolsonaro in 50 square meters confined? How do you feel about it? I feel so cheerful.
Yeah, I don't feel particularly cheerful about other people's misery, but I think it's the justice being made, right? And I think that's very important. I mean, you had a very similar situation in the U.S., right? In the last election, the one before the last election, right? And I think in that sense, our judiciary system was more effective. And for that reason, that's why it is important that we have a strong Senate, so that this judiciary system can remain independent, and can remain is able to continue to look things in a, it's not totally partial, but semi-partial way. Because otherwise, I mean, you have that movement worldwide. That's happening in the States as well. It's like you're changing. The Supreme Court allows you to change intrinsic rules about for a country, right? And like, basic civility, altogether. So it's going to be a big fight. It's going to be a challenging year for everyone. I think it's, Trump managed to really surprise a lot of people, or maybe not so much. But I wonder, I know that in China, Ileana, people call him like, I don't know if you've heard that, like he's the nation builder, right? Because
or Comrade Trump or nation builder. Because he's making China great again, or not America. But I think essentially what it sounds like from you guys is that Brazil needs a socialist revolution.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, I think because otherwise, honestly, everything gets piecemealed, dealt with, one by one by one. And it's just every time you make one step forward, they hit you with something and you're 3 steps back again. So it's just, it's pretty dire, although I hope Lula wins and there can be some progress. Because maybe in his last term he can make some bigger strides.
And he can be more bold, right? It's his last term, so I think it's it's now or never, right? I hope so. I hope he is bolder.
And I hope he wins in that case. But now moving on to another country that well, to be honest, this Cuba is what I'm talking about. They have been incredibly bold, incredibly revolutionary, but they have paid this incredible price for it. And Trump again threatening them again, right after the kidnapping of President Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores. Trump threatens on Truth Social in capitals, there will be no more oil or money going to Cuba -0! I strongly suggest they make a deal before it is too late. I mean, this type of belligerence is something else. But I want to give context to the audience. I'm sure many of our audience actually do know this. But the U.S. embargo on Cuba is the longest running unilateral sanctions regime in modern history. It's coming up to 65 years. And the consequences of this are incredible. I mean, you're talking about strangling an island. But on January 12th, China released an official statement in support of Cuba, stating, "We once again urge the United States to end the blockade, sanctions, and all forms of coercive measures against Cuba, as this would benefit regional peace and stability." I mean, obviously, this is true. But along with that, they have also, Xi Jinping just approved a new round of aid, because they have given aid to Cuba before, but they have approved a new round of aid consisting of $80 million, and reportedly it's up to about 90,000 tons of rice. Now, this is actually kind of significant because Cuba is running out of rice. So that it's an important thing, even though obviously we would like more to rally around Cuba. especially because right after the kidnapping of President Maduro, people were like, oh, Cuba's done. Cuba's done. You know, I think it's really undermining what Cuba has achieved in their 65 years of embargo. It's really underestimating Cuba. And I'm hoping that other countries in the global South will rally. I mean, what is your sense of how Latin America, obviously you did talk about how it's difficult, but how are they rallying around Cuba?
I think, you know, in South America, the country that has been the most helpful towards Cuba since what happened on January 3rd is Mexico, right? I think Mexico has been giving some support and still shipping oil to the island. And, you know, certainly, you know, the help that China gave was the donation of rice is important. You know, Brazil has sent humanitarian assistance to Cuba, you know, since, you know, for the past few years, and has been helping them since late 2025 already. But it was more tied to, you know, the hurricane response, not directly, you know, the replacement of Venezuelan oil. But it's tricky. I mean, I was recently there a few years ago with my film Tropical Utopia, and I had never been there before, and I was marveled by the island and by their people. And as you said, what they were able to achieve in such harsh conditions of the embargo, that really makes it extremely hard for people to continue living there. And I wish there would be a more cohesive voice towards that. Mm-hmm. And I think in general, I think that's what we need. I think there is the BRICS and the Global South in general. And I think even other countries now that have been threatened by Trump, like Canada and Denmark, you know, we need to have a unified voice against this barbarity and against this new world that is being imposed without rules, right? Because that's essentially what is what he, you know, his foreign policy is all about, you know. And I think there is a certain amount in regards to Cuba that has to do with domestic support, and Mark Rubio being a descendant of Cubans and all the Cuban Americans, you know, that, you know, have voted for Trump because of that, you know. And in this case, yes, I think, you know, a lot of these people would like to see a regime change. You know, there's not really, you know, but you know, so as soon as the U.S. is there, it's going to turn into Puerto Rico. We know it, right? It's going to be Puerto Rico. You know, it's going to be resorts and whatever, gambling. It's going to go back to what it was in the 50s. So I think the way out, you know, our way out has to do with multipolarity. You know, I think multipolarity and, you know, working with peace non-violently, you know, trying to, you know, through dialogue needs to be the way. You know, it needs to be the way, and it needs to be, we need to have a cohesive voice from the global South, but now also with countries like Canada, Mexico, you know, even the European Union, whoever, to be able to front this empire in decline. You know, I think it's clear a lot of what Trump is doing has to do with that. They know the empire is in decline. They know it's unavoidable that China is going to become the most powerful country in the world. But empires, when they're in decline, they can have desperate moves. And what we're seeing is a lot of desperate moves, right? Yeah. Even towards Venezuela, I mean, removing Maduro, it's like, okay, they remove Maduro, but as, you know, coming back to the beginning of the interview, Ileana, but then what? You know, there was no real regime change. Are they going to truly benefit from that oil? I've seen reactions of an Exxon and Chevron executives saying, look, we're not going to go back there. We've left twice. It's an expensive investment. It's going to take decades to make money. So he's not even thinking of those details. It's crazy. It's kind of like Bolsonaro with weapons. I think that's the biggest difference. A lot of the movements are really, and I think a lot of the movements, like in Brazil, we have a saying, como que ladra não morde, the dog that barks loud doesn't bite. So I think he has a lot of this, he barks louder than he acts, so he did that with the tariffs. And if you front him, then he went down. He said he was going to invade Greenland, like, oh, maybe not, we're going to come with a deal. So he comes with this absurd kind of, shock and like an extreme statement that will dominate the world headlines, and creates like some kind of fear and urgency around this stuff. And then he will back up, and kind of make a negotiation, and eventually declare victory, right? Because he frames as a big win. I think that's how he dealt with China. That's how he dealt with Brazil. I think Europe was extremely submissive in the tariffs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes back to the beginning of the interview again. It's like, I don't think against Trump particularly, but the U.S., neo-colonial system in general, being submissive is not the best attitude. So I think
and I think like what you're sort of pointing to now is their only strategies right now, even the oil in Venezuela, is just to try to disrupt China's supply chains, and it's just to contain China. And honestly, it's not working, but they can't seem to think of any other strategies. And I think I'm trying to think, like, for myself, I was trying to think, like, what could they, if I was the imperialist, what would I do to, continue this power? And I'm not really seeing a way for it, because really logically they should just be working with China. But if they work with China, then they do their unipolar world does disappear. They cannot. They're actually.
It has already disappeared. They're just the ones that are not seeing it.
Yeah, I know, but so basically, there is no avenue to maintain their unipolarity, and they cannot accept that. Like so their entire strategy is just hitting with military, because military, I would say military is where we have 902 U.S. military bases. They have installations all around the world. I think that is unparalleled. But again, they're not winning wars. They're just draining resources. That is where they're strongest, though. And that's what they're doing. They're just doubling down on that in propaganda. And there's no other strategy forward. So, I think what's worrying me, though, is there's no strategy for it, but they're so arrogant. And like Sara said, they're like high on their own supply. They're just believing their own propaganda. I don't know. How are they going to climb down from this? When are they going to accept the reality?
I promise that they are going to drag us along. I want to show you, I don't know if you have more questions to João, but if you don't have, I would like to share a video with him. João, do you have a Xanax with you, something to calm down, or I don't know, maybe chamomile? This is the so-called new Trump's Rio Stage project, which is neo-colonial in its nature. It's called the Board of Peace of Gaza. Let's check this out. Look at that. Look at that. It's so category Belarus, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, Hungary, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan have accepted. So it seems that the credentials is to be a vicious autocrat, probably a monarchy, if you will, or like Albania, vocation for authoritarianism and people's oppression. It feels like this is the credentials that you have to have the board. And in this board, which is, you have to put a billion in.
Billion. So, well, that's for a permanent seat.
Yeah. So because it's an investment to Trump. I would prefer to invest in a pyramid scheme than to put $1 billion on Trump's hand for the boat piece. He will certainly get the money for himself, of course, because if you put $1 billion, you don't go away. But Trump has vetoes, right? Trump will be indefinitely the director of the board. So, but basically, Trump, I'm going to suck up to you, and I'm going to put $1 billion. And of course, we can't forget who else is also in part of the board with Jared Kushner and Tony Blair, from all the man who we definitely know looks like a secret agent, walks like a secret agent, and is definitely has his ties, as Roman Polanski showed in The Ghostwriter, to the British Secret Service. He is the man put there to implode the left wing in the UK and create the new Labour. João, so there's a lot of reporting about that. What's the board of peace? Marco Rubio, Stephen Wickoff. Oh, sorry, I forgot all of that shit. So, João, there is mixed information about this. Some are saying this is to antagonize the UN, to undermine the UN. Some are saying this is a new real estate project. And some say it's even something far more structural, like a blueprint for a new regional order in the Middle East that aligns in practice with the imaginary biblical perception of the greater Israel. Euphrates so some people say it's even more structural, that it's the reshaping of the whole relationships in the Middle East, where the greater Israel should prevail, the biblical obscenity from Zionists. I want to have your take on that. Where do you stand in those type of narratives?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. I mean, it's certainly he's trying to create a instrument that is parallel to the UN. I mean, we already have, an international institution to deal with this type of institution, and it is the United Nations, and the Security Council and so forth. I mean, he's trying to create a parallel UN. That's what I think. But as you've pointed out, what countries did really subscribe to that idea? So I don't think it was. Hasn't been very successful at it. I think as far as the intentions, both of things that you said are real. There's a real estate project going on. He was as explicit as showing his Gaza Riviera project, and if I'm not wrong, it's his son-in-law who's heading that.
Yeah.
So, and then there is certainly a will of the Israeli state and, the Zionists worldwide, and especially in the United States, to create the state of Greater Israel. I mean, that's not a conspiracy theory. You can take a few quick searches on Google and you can find videos of Bibi saying that himself, so
I mean, I think that my view, this is an opinion, my view on that is that Israel is in an existential position right now, because they have to justify why they are, even though the mask is slipping with Zionism, people are sort of seeing through the genocidal project now. So it can't be used anymore as the moral army. It can't be used in that sense. They have to justify why they are still worthy of having $3.6 billion in military aid per year. And so much more than that. I mean, so many companies go through Israel. That's just one factor in terms of how much money that they're actually getting from the US. I mean, they are considered the Palestine laboratory.
Just say lab.
Lab for a reason, you know what I mean? The AI, the drones, the tech, that's all being utilized on Palestinians before being utilized on the rest of us. I mean, so they have to justify their strategic use. And how are they going to do that is really like expanding their power, bribery, coercion, intelligence. I mean, they're going to fight to the death and Bibi is saying even, oh, in 10 years, we're not even going to need US support. I mean, that is his ambition, is to not need that, not to be dependent anymore, to be important enough. So it's all part of this sort of grandiose thing of not letting go of the power and their importance in that region, for sure. And also, I just want to give like context for people that might not know, because it can be a little bit confusing because of the way Trump talks. This Board of Peace was the same one, if we remember, on 17th of November, the Security Council of the UN. Do you remember when it was first introduced in the UN and China and Russia abstained from voting against it? So there was a huge outcry, especially from the progressive, supposed progressive Western left, that was like, why didn't China and Russia do anything? Like, they could have vetoed it. But I think now we're looking at, like, several months on, we can kind of see why, like, China and Russia wouldn't want to go against the Muslim majority countries for this thing that is really farcical. I mean, even without this so-called Board of Peace, which just the name is so ridiculous, no one is going to believe it's a Board of Peace. They would still go into Gaza and try to attempt this real estate project. They have had these plans that were unveiled in the Davos ceremony for months now. We've seen those plans, I think, last year, even before this 17th of November initiative. So that has always been their plan, to do a real estate thing. I mean, this is the real estate family. So this has always been their issue. And
and then my question to you guys, as much as this is farcical and ludicrous and absurd and dystopic, could they succeed? What do you guys think? Will Trump succeed? And to which extent?
Not with the Board of Peace. I mean, I don't think so. It has already failed. He might get something out of it, as he does with all the absurdities that he comes up with, right? So he's probably going to get something out of this whole Greenland hysteria. It's not going to be exactly what he wanted, but he'll get something.
Some business deals.
Yeah, he's a businessman. He's after a business deal, and then he barks loud, threatens, and then gets a deal that is okay for him, right? So I think in the end of the day, that's what he's looking for. As far as nobody believing in it, I mean, as far as worldwide leaders, maybe not, but as far as people there, I think there's many that do believe, because, when you talk about Zionism and, bring back our conversation to the evangelical church, there is the Jewish Zionism, but there's the Christian Zionism as well, So within the doctrine of, the newborn Christian, the neo-Pentecostal churches, lies the idea of the second coming of Christ that is tied to Zionism, to actually freeing Israel of the sinners, which are the Muslims. So this is something that is indoctrinated both in U.S. churches and in Brazil, in Africa nowadays, everywhere where these churches are. So, I mean, that's why you have these people in Brazil carrying, Israeli flags, and so there's a lot of, Christian Zionism as well. So there's support for that, there's support for that worldwide. And I think it's a growing support, and that's why it's scary.
Growing support? How so? Can you explain to us?
Well, because it's directly attached to the growth of the evangelical churches, as these ideas of Zionism are spread through, the pastors of Igreja Universal in Brazil, Assembleia de Deus, and these people, they don't even know why they have a pro-Israel discourse. Many people don't even know they're Jewish. I've seen some
maybe they're Christians,
being interviewed in the street, and they thought, they're not Christians, and she was like shaking her head.
No.
It's really crazy, the level of brainwashing that happens both through the evangelical churches and through social media, that there is a growing belief in this idea of a greater Israel, So I think, although this might not be something that happens today or tomorrow, this is something that has been working, the right, worldwide right has been working on for a long time, since 1948, since the state of Israel was established, so this idea, or even before that, when the Zionist movement started in the 19th century. But I think this idea of the greater Israel and of freeing that region of evil is something that permeates amongst a lot of Christians worldwide.
I mean, this is why China's stance on religion, obviously attacked by the US propaganda machine that, China is not into freedom of religion. They're fine with you doing it personally. What you do in your own house, do in your own house, but don't evangelize. And this is precisely why we have to uncover the fact that, like you, Sarah, mentioned, the CIA is another misinformation campaign by the US propaganda machine. So powerful in this case, because these people have no reasoning skills. They're not rational at all.
No, it is more than misinformation. It's domination of minds and hearts. Like these people that Joan is describing, their dream is to be a wall kisser in this Jerusalem, to kiss the wall. They don't even know what's going on. They are waiting for baby Jesus to arrive at the second time. I'm waiting for the meteor to hit the earth. That's waiting for real catastrophic things here.
But this is definitely how they do it. I mean, they've done it with fundamentalist Islam groups as well, US backed terrorist groups in Africa. I mean, it's all over the world, and religion is one of the most powerful weapons for this. It's more than misinformation. It's a way of indoctrinating the system of thinking. It's so basically, again, it's dismantling the propaganda around it, uncovering where it comes from. But I do think one of the things is that because Trump maybe confident himself, but to try to replace the UN, that's the thing, is like he can't help himself from going very, very far. I think that's where it's like possibly that wouldn't be as persuasive for people, in general, to be like.
I mean, when he says replacing the UN, does he really need to do that? Because
exactly, that's what I'm saying.
As much as the UN is important, as much as the UN has, the agencies have incredible important work, and it was something really important after the Second World War to have this international consensus on human rights, on boundaries. But the way the West uses the UN is a bit to punish other countries is striving for their sovereignty. I don't think he needs to dismantle the UN.
I mean, I would just push back on that.
UN, the way it's operating. I mean, President Lula was very critical of the veto right at the UN. He's saying we need this institution, we need a form of governance, but not in this fashion that was shaped under the domination of the West. We need a proper UN. But the way it's operating, I mean, Trump doesn't need the board of directors, in my view.
Well, I'm just going to push back on that. Yes.
Okay, go.
I'm going to push back on that. Sorry, Sarah. There's basically two things. This idea that the West ever followed international law is just
never. They never did.
A myth. It's a complete myth. Even when the UN Charter was first formed, I mean, the US did a covert regime change operation in Iran in 1953. So to assume that the US is upholding international law is absolutely farcical. But I do want to point out that we're in a kind of a different moment here, because China also was asked about this. How are you responding to the Trump's Board of Peace on Gaza and how it wants to replace the UN? And the foreign ministry spokesperson, Hua Jiakun, says, no matter how the international situation evolves, China will firmly safeguard the international system with the UN at its core, the international order based on international law and the basic norms of international relations rooted in the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. So this is where it becomes a thing of, we've all agreed on the UN Charter, like internationally, supposedly. And now if we just adhere to it collectively as a multilateral world, we're looking at we're looking at, this is the pathway to the multilateral world. So in this sort of scenario, obviously Trump is going to be against the UN, right? Because they're seeing like their influence within that institution waning, as China has been mentioning the UN Charter like over and over again. And, over the past few years in every single foreign policy statement. And even Russia as well has been, mentioning it, has been trying to adhere to international law, even though they've been accused of multiple violations, right? So it's like a matter of like, this is the struggle of the new multilateral world. What is it going to look like? What is the structure going to look like? And the international law that's already there in place can help us move to that next part, I think.
João, your thoughts on that? We said so much.
Yeah. Well, look, I think the UN is what we have, and we should fight for it to remain alive. And we shouldn't buy into Trump's new plan that weakens the UN even more. I mean, I agree that, the UN Charter has not been respected, especially by the US, but it's a charter, and it's something that supposedly we agreed upon, right? So, and the UN is not perfect. I mean, one of the things the Brazilian government has been fighting for a long time is for, a change in the UN, a reform of the UN to include, a stronger participation with the power of veto of, global South countries. So that's certainly necessary. And I think if we just simply say, okay, the UN is useless now, and, the hell with it, then I think it's going to be even more dangerous.
Trap, isn't it? It's a trap.
Yeah, it's a trap. It's a trap. It's a catch-22, like they say in the US. But I think we have to fight the UN, and again, I think we need to have a more coherent voice. I think there is a coherent agreement amongst the majority of the world leaders and the majority of the world leaders of powerful countries that we're dealing with a very unusual president in the United States. I think that's cohesive, So let us use this cohesion amongst all these powers, big powers, medium powers, to use that together as a diplomatic weapon to dialogue with the United States. Because, as both of you pointed out, if it comes down to military, who knows what can happen, and I think if there is something that has changed is that we have a world that is, where military strength can determine real independence, and, wars can reappear, as a tool of political change, that we hadn't seen for a while. At least had a better makeup, right? It was like, oh, regime change, we're going to save these people, but as far as convincing people of this bigger change, I just had a thought around Iran. Today, I mean, I'm not saying that what people are fighting for and the lack of freedom in Iran and how they treat women is right or not, but the West and the US is managing. I see many progressive people posting online things that will, in the end, justify the invasion of Iran.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's what they want. That's what the US want. I think Trump, I was looking at, sorry to interrupt you, but I was looking at Alistair Crook saying, so Trump he grew when he went to Venezuela, kidnapped Maduro, and he thought he could do the same thing in Iran. It didn't work out. It didn't work out, but they are trying to create separatism in Iran. You know, Mossad in Farsi said, we have our boots in the ground. They admitted by their own words that they were infiltrated in those movements through the Kurdish, through the other separatist movements, to create a total disarray in Iran. You saw those people beating up older citizens, and, you know, you saw the Iranian policeman being killed by the Mossad infiltration in Iran. So what people are supporting here is an Israeli, American-backed invasion of a sovereign country that resists and provides Gaza its survival. And I think it backfired. It backfired massively. And Trump is now under pressure to go again. And Iran said, if you come this time around, it'll be different. This time around, we'll go for it. And you go to the end with you. And Trump wants total assurance to go back to Iran and to do again, because he thought it would be so easy as in Venezuela. We're going to go there and going to, no. You don't understand Iran. You don't understand it. And it's crazy, the Western propaganda against Iran. I don't know, João, if you know that, but the majority of teachers in universities and students in university in Iran are women. They are women. They're highly educated. Iran has a tradition of a revolutionary. Of course, this is a country under sanctions. There are less freedom. You have economy that goes underground with a lot of corruption. But those are criticism of the Iranian people to do, not for us. Exactly. Yeah, and I was stunned because Iran again understood the cyber aspect of sovereignty, cut out the internet, and all the disarray died because it wasn't organic, because it was planted, because it was Mossad with its boots on the ground, and they have said and talked really out loud, and the Western press, oh, no, Mossad was not involved. But Mossad is saying they were involved. We know they were involved.
Well, I mean, U.S. officials have already said that Mossad was involved.
Yeah.
Remember?
Well, Europe is denying that. It's still denying that. And the BBC and CNN used footage of protests in favor of Iran, pretending it was protest against. The level of propaganda in Iran, John, thank you for bringing Iran here, because as you say, the left is not getting it. Thank you for this criticism. So
this is obviously color revolution one-on-one.
Yeah,
I don't understand why is the Western left not getting this? It is the exact same playbook as what they used in Hong Kong, but did not succeed.
And in Brazil, 2013.
The what?
Yeah, I think there is, you know, there's something that is happening there that it reminds me of Gramsci, you know, and the idea of creating a common sense, right? That is backed by, you know, a cultural narrative. And I think whenever, you know, neoliberalism and the West has embraced capitalism, has embraced like, let's say, affirmative action, right? So everything that has to do with women's rights, you know, racism, you know, all of these things have been embraced by capitalism. And it's a shock for us Westerners to see the way women are treated in Muslim countries, right? That maybe not to us, but that's the perception I'm talking about. Yeah. You know, what the general perception is. And I think there has been a huge success at that. I mean, in many ways, it was, you know, a success with Israel until it became absurd, and everywhere, you know, you could see the genocide that was happening. But, you know, certainly worked with a lot of left-wing Jews that I know and that I can't speak with anymore, you know.
Oh, thank God.
Well, but, you know, it's again, it's through dialogue that we progress. So I think regardless of, you know, and it's always the same, in my opinion, you know, I'm not like a huge fan of Maduro particularly, but I don't think it comes down to us, and sovereignty is not about that. Sovereignty is about, people of that particular nation taking control over their own nation. And if there needs to be a change, they need to be the ones that provide the change. And we don't need a World Cup to come around and a world judge if human rights happen here or not. But there's certainly a huge propaganda machine, and now with AI and with the big techs and all of that, the social media machine that is in place, it's very easy to create a status quo in which the society is going to say, look, the women in Iran have been attacked and have had their rights really compromised for years and years, and there needs to be a change. Let's bomb the hell out of them and get the oil in the meantime as we free these people. So differently than what they did in Venezuela, where there was no regime change, this is more like the classical type of coercion and kind of justify regime change. So they're not just doing one thing, like in Venezuela, it was new because it was like, at first he for a few weeks he talked about narco-terrorism, and then like after, on the same day he kidnapped Maduro, he was like, it's all about the oil, we need that oil, and we're just gonna get it, so there was something a lot more explicit, right? And I think that explicitness appeals to his MAGA, because his fight is different than now. We're going to change this, and we're going to lose money because there's this dictator miles away from us, thousands of miles away from us, that is harassing women. MAGA doesn't give a damn about this. But like, let's go right here, take this guy out and get that oil for free so you have cheaper gas. That resonates with MAGA, right? So there's not even just one strategy, right? It's so and I'm going to have to leave in a few minutes, but just to wrap up, I think it's what we live now is something that is, we don't know what can happen. It's so absurd. We don't know what can happen next. If he actually, we invaded Greenland or whatever, and he said he wouldn't, so it's so hard to expect. So we can expect the worst, and the craziest things, and things that are not carefully planned, to come out of this government. It's very different than, when we had Bush or even Reagan, other Republican, more traditional Republican presence in the U.S. And I think there's two things that the world can do. I think there is a growing insatisfaction with him internally. So we have to feed that, even if it becomes a civil war, with ICE and all the violence they're perpetuating to U.S. citizens. And, I think a lot of people that even voted for him are seeing that, look, this guy is insane. And then I think Europe has realized that being submissive didn't work, and I think in many ways, the construction, although it hasn't gone all the way through, but the construction, for instance, of this free zone in between Mercosur and European Union is a multipolar, a multilateral movement. This is the type of movement that we need, and we need to do that with the BRICS and with Canada. And certainly we should have done it with Venezuela. I agree with you that it was a mistake not to have Venezuela in the BRICS. Maybe if Venezuela had been in the BRICS, I don't know if we would have had this invasion, this kidnapping. But regardless, it has happened. So I think, moving forward, we need, to, double bet on multipolarity. We need to double bet on the BRICS, on CELAC, and on the construction of dialogue, with the European Union, with the other powers, with the medium-sized powers like Australia and so forth, because everybody
want that, João, because my impression is that the global north is still playing imperialism. Is still, it's just a matter who is further in the hierarchy. You know, Europe. I think I don't see any structural differences. I think they're just saying,
I mean,
okay, it's ours.
We do have a segment on Canada. So, I mean, I don't know if you want to.
João needs to go for him. We have exploited him like the US exploited Israeli oil. We've taken
we
him
don't want to
20 minutes, almost 30 minutes out of eating his time.
Yes, but I just wanted to make the segue that Canada is showing exactly what you're saying, João. The pathway to the breaking down, even though it's very much part of the global north and very much part of the US empire system, it is showing the pathway out of a complete cohesive bloc. That is, we're seeing the cracks already, but there's some movement here. Whether or not I can sustain that is another thing, but we're going to just get into that. So, but João, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your insight.
It was great talking to you both. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, and I hope you can come back.
Yeah, whenever you want. Just call me up.
Okay, thank you, João.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Okay, cool. So we're going to go on to a really good segue because, you know, as João was talking about the multipolar world, which is a little bit different from the multilateral, right? Multipolar, many poles of power. I am for multilateral, but obviously multipolar would be a good step forward than unipolar, you know?
Right.
So so just like to add on to this Davos thing, here we are with Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada. This is kind of an interesting speech of his. And again, like we're saying, it shows the pathway forward for how the Western imperialist bloc, which is declining already, and it's already having these power dynamic like conflicts within it, could perhaps start to move away from the unipolar domination of the US, right? So it's interesting. This speech, as a contrast to Macron's speech in Davos, the Canadian leader, Mark Carney, he calls out the hypocrisy of the existing imperialist world order. And that is interesting because, as we remember with Macron, he does not actually call out the imperialist world order, you know? So he says, and I'm quoting from here, "We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false." Okay, I'm going to just flag out and say that it was more than partially false, maybe completely false. But never mind. Keep on going, Mark Carney. That the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically, and we knew that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused of the victim. So that's really
surprising. That's really a surprising speech because it has, let's say, it has truth in it. You know, it's just not appropriation of terminology. It's just coherent truth.
Yeah. So and then he goes on to say, and these next three statements I think are really important. He goes, "This fiction was useful." Okay, this is the thing. As an imperialist, he is pointing out how useful this fiction was. And American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. Okay, mind you, this is only true for the Western imperialists, not true for any of the global south, not stable, not collective security. We've been exploited and distract, but he at least points that out. The fiction was useful. And now he says this very key part: this bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. And that, I think, is so interesting considering that Canada and China just reset their trade relations. So this is, I think, not only has he given the speech, he's also backed it up with prior, about like a week before, resetting trade agreements with China. And the reason why, I mean, to be frank, it was the US who pushed Canada to this. And I think this is kind of the issue that we're having. I mean, just before we go on to that part, I just want to say that the U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick was extremely triggered by Mark Carney's speech, and he reacted very strongly, saying, like, you know, basically, how dare Mark Carney say these things critical of the U.S. And he was like, is China going to open up their trade, their imports to Canada, Canadian imports into China? Is China going to do that? That's basically what Howard Lutnick was saying, because Canada and the US have, well, a really robust trade agreement. I mean, and he has a point in that Canada is very dependent on the US. Right now, they have 76 exports of their Canadian exports actually go to the US. So they're incredibly dependent on the US. And that is a dangerous, dangerous position to be in. So with the resetting of relations with China, they are attempting, I think, to diversify that sort of thing. It's not going to be just China, right? Like, obviously with China, resetting is absolutely important, because China also is very much involved in all the supply chains. So if Canada can reset their relationship with China, that sort of opens up different markets around the world as well. They're also I'm sure they're going to go to India and ASEAN and etc. But China was just a really good first step. So we can kind of look at that here now that they are doing this. This was last week. Mark Carney visited China, and a lot of things did actually happen here. I mean, for one thing, the tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs, they rolled that back. And it's important to note that Canada is the first major Western country to do this with China. Remember when Trump did the Liberation Day, all the Western countries basically followed suit.
Unforgettable, yeah.
Right. But the global South countries didn't really, because they can't. They're being sanctioned. They're being sanctioned. They're being like controlled by the US, but they need their trading agreements with China. So they actually didn't really go along with the global North the way that these other countries did. Canada is the first one to do that. So I think this is a significant moment. I mean, obviously, let's not get ahead of ourselves, even though they are resetting their trade agreements with China. As I said before, 76% of Canada's exports still go to the US. And prior to the freezing of trade agreements of Liberation Day, only 4% was going to China. So that's a huge discrepancy.
Huge, yeah. And I mean, same here, December 2018, Canada had arrested Chief Financial Officer of telecommunications firm Huawei. So that shows a huge shift, shift in politics. Our comrade Trump in action again.
Yeah, so it is a big deal that they're doing this, but it's only the first step in like a slight crack in terms of diversifying from the US. And it's going to take a long time. And I mean, we're looking at, like, in the medium term, also, we're looking at agreements for 49,000 EV vehicles, and also a return to exports from Canada, canola oil, seafood, etc. I mean, these things I think will be actually increasing, because China, in the Chinese speech at Davos, the vice premier, China's vice premier, he did talk about, I'm going to see, Vice Premier He Lifeng, he did talk about how China never actually sought trade surplus. So this is an important factor, because last week we talked about the $1.2 trillion in trade surplus. That is an insane amount. And again, it is to do, I think, large part because of Trump's tariffs. Because remember, the tariffs meant that, let me just read his thing, because he's basically saying here, we never seek trade surplus. On top of being the world's factory, we hope to be the world's market too. However, in many cases, when China wants to buy, others don't want to sell. Trade issues often become security hurdles. And this was This was the issue with the sanctions that Trump was implementing onto China, tech sanctions, semiconductor chips as well. But, you know, there are other consequences to the sanctions and tariffs that Trump imposed. So China is going to make this effort. And he's saying here, we will give full play to our supersized market, step up our efforts to expand import and strengthen industrial cooperation so that countries can better share in China's opportunities. So this is, I think, an indication of where China is going to go in the next year. And hopefully Canada opening this door will lead to others.
Yeah, it might lead others. And I think it shows in a way on the reverse, thinking on the reverse, Ileana, it goes to show also how much the alliance between the West is ideological. Trump says we share civilization. And I think he's questioning this ideological alliance. I think this is the first time I see a Western leader questioning the shared values. So extremely important and relevant news. Thanks for bringing this. This is where I really see a shift. I don't see in Greenland, but I do see here. It's completely different. Yeah.
Yeah, and granted, it's a small shift because Canada is actually quite small, you know, and very dependent on the US, like I said. But it shows what can happen, like what Europe really should be doing. First of all,
it's small, but it's very meaningful. It's meaningful.
I think so. And I'm hoping that, you know, other countries can, even within that global North imperial bloc, can start to do these things, because then this kind of delusion of hegemony can sort of fall away and we can have more.
Hegemony requires a very dogmatic thinking. You need to assert your position no matter what the world circumstances around you are. It's about asserting a position. Everything must be falling apart, but you're still asserting a position, and you make things fit into that perception, which is a distorted self-perception. It's dogmatic. And I think here Canada showed someone who's reading circumstances, who's saying, look, we are not that equal as we want to be. Maybe we're more equal with China. And I think this is a little bit what João was saying here. Brazil wants peace, wants diplomacy, and China is a much better partner in that one. I wouldn't say alliance because it's not about competition or war, but a partner, a cooperative partner. And China was very clear in Davos. They talked about cooperation. They didn't talk about anything else. I am the best partner to trade with. I want independence. Our Greenland is mine. It's a completely different paradigm.
Yeah, and it's multilateralism in the actual definition, which is all countries. They kept saying all countries need to have this, not just us. All countries need to have this sort of sovereignty, and they're showing the way forward. So, I mean, as in, like, there are tangible actions to the way forward. It's not like everyone has to follow China's. No, it's just that there are actual ways to do this that other countries can benefit from, and that's basically all they're saying, really. Yeah. So we're actually ending. Are we ending our live on a slightly hopeful note?
Yeah, for the first time around. Good.
Okay. We have to stop talking, otherwise we're going to go.
Let's stop here. Let's leave it the way it is. Let's think more hopefully. These doors opening.
Yeah.
Okay, Ileana, I'll see you next week. I'll see everybody on next Friday. Don't forget to subscribe. Smash the like button and share with friends. Share with people. We depend on you to spread our voices. If you can collaborate financially, the better. But if you can't, share the word. Let's build up together new perceptions and break down the imperialist lens, leaving nothing out of it.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sara. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.